Is Stephen Harper the best conservative leader in the world? Well, maybe, and it's not just my point of view. The National Review magazine out of New York City thinks he just might be also. Joining us now from New York is Jay Nordlinger, senior editor of National Review, founded by William F. Buckley in 1955, still growing strong. Jay, welcome to the show.
Well, thank you so much.
Now, why would a New York-based conservative magazine write about little old Canada and Stephen Harper? What makes you look north for inspiration?
It might have to do with what's happening down here in the United States. But Stephen Harper is a very impressive character regardless. People ought to pay attention, especially conservatives, wherever they live.
Now, tell me a little bit about National Review. I know it. I've loved it for years. I've even been on one of your National Review cruises, which was a hoot. Now I've got a cruise of my own. Tell me why who your viewers are, and why you thought they might, what in particular they might learn from studying Canada.
Well, we're sometimes called the flagship journal of American conservatism. As you said, Bill Buckley founded us in the 1950s. We're bi-weekly, though we have a daily website, National Review Online, and we're interested in all sorts of things and like to wave the conservative flag, of course, and then we have to look northward for some leadership now. Stephen Harper has been very impressive for some time, in my opinion. I realize this is pretty late in his premiership. It's been since 2006. It's not as though National Review has just discovered him, but frankly, Harper kept getting my attention in domestic affairs, of course, but maybe particularly in foreign affairs. He seemed such a departure to me. He seemed un-Canadian in a way, or at least un-Trudeaupian. Here was a man who was staunchly pro-Israel, who didn't mind talking back to the UN, who withdrew from the Kyoto Protocol, and so on, who opened an office of religious freedom. This was something new under the Canadian sun, at least as I see it. Unlike you, I'm not an expert. But though I've lived in New York for many years, I am a Michigander, a native of Michigan, so I consider myself sort of half Canadian, or maybe a quarter Canadian, just by virtue of having grown up not very far from Windsor.
Now, you treat the issue about Canadian conservatives not particularly liking the noisy endorsements of American conservatives, because up here, you know, that's used against conservatives. Oh, that's U.S. style. You're in league with the Republicans. Say, did the Kochs fund you? I mean, it's when Canadian conservatives...
Would that they had.
Yeah, that's right. What do you make of that?
Anytime the Kochs want to... Right. Right. No, I understand. They think that, I think many Canadian, well, I think Canadian conservatives like us a fair amount, like the likes of me, but they don't necessarily want others to know it, because we could be the kiss of death. And I think of that old line in American politics, it's probably used in Canada as well. I'll endorse either you or your opponent, whichever is better for you. And so I don't want to cause Stephen Harper and the Conservatives any trouble by expressing my admiration of them and National Review's admiration of them, but we do admire them, and if that upsets some of the newspapers, so be it. Yeah,
you know, for a few days we were doing a lot of live coverage from the CPAC Conservative Convention just outside Washington, and I remember that they invited Stephen Harper to come down, and he almost immediately said, no, not interested, because although I think he would have been received as a rock star, he didn't need that. Now, let me ask you this. I look around the world, and I see conservative ideas, frankly, in retreat. I see the Arab Spring turning into an Islamist fall. I see China, you know, I see them becoming more aggressive and militaristic. I see Russia lapsing back to Soviet-style empire building. And I see the European Union being ever more socialist and economically crumbling. I see a lot of bad news. Is it that Canada is particularly good, or is it just that the rest of the world's going to hell?
Both. Both. Ezra, I think that Stephen Harper is a leader of the West. He sticks up for the principles and values of the West. He sticks up for what we used to call Judeo-Christian civilization. He truly is a man of the West, and especially of Anglo-American culture. That is not to slight Quebec. He is a Canadian, and I would say a full Canadian, not just a native of Ontario or an adopted son of Alberta. But he is very much a representative of Anglo-American civilization, and he doesn't blush to express these things. We don't have many such leaders now. Whom do we have in office? Who are the heads of state or government? Well, we have Cameron in Britain, and we have Angela Merkel in Germany. We have Netanyahu in Israel. Some say we have Mr. Singh in India. But the pickings are pretty slim. And so Stephen Harper, to me, seems extra staunch. When he sticks up for Israel, he is staunch. When he talks back to the UN, when he takes a tough line on Iran, this is a guy with some clarity. And I must say I find it very refreshing, and it's surprising for me as an American, or as a U.S. man, to see it in Ottawa. I think a lot of us thought that Canada would be pretty much sort of a social democratic place or a Trudeaupian place or a Scandinavian-style welfare state, although Sweden's doing much better, I must say.
Yeah, that's right.
For many years. And here comes Stephen Harper, and he is sort of a breath of fresh air from the West, that is, from Western Canada. And he's, of course, as you know better than I, a somewhat cautious politician, or let's say a disciplined politician, a gradualist or incrementalist. He is not the kind to scare the horses. But my view, and you can correct me on this, my view is he is governing Canada in as conservative a fashion as the public now allows.
I think you're right on that. Listen, we only have a minute left, but I want to tell you what I think is the chief advantage of Canadian Conservatives. I don't think they're more right-wing than American Conservatives. I don't think the Conservative electoral base is as large. But one thing that Canadian Conservatives did right is they reached out to new Canadians, to ethnic groups, to immigrants. And in fact, they broke the left-wing lock on those communities that existed for a generation. Now, the Chinese Canadians vote for the Conservatives. Jewish Canadians vote for the Conservatives. Koreans, Eastern Europeans. Do you think there's any hope in the United States that Conservatives can break through beyond just a few high prominent names like Alan West or Nikki Haley?
I must say that media bias here is very powerful, and so is the bias of education. Our schools, kindergarten through graduate school, tend to be left-dominated. That's a very hard thing to counter, and Republicans are demonized in a million ways, in movies and popular music, in the news media, and so on. And so that just means we have to work extra hard. We don't have the wind at our back, that's for sure. Quite the contrary. But I think Harper and the Canadian Conservatives set a good example. And before I leave, Ezra, I must thank you for what you're doing for freedom of speech in Canada. As far as some of us down here are concerned, you're a regular folk hero. So keep going, and don't let the SOBs get you down.
Jay, thanks very much for saying that on today especially. Take care, my friend. Thanks for taking the time with us.